Recession, deficits, and thousands of jobs lost. Today on Context, we explore what it means to find hope while living in economic tough times. The Liberal government is forecasting larger than expected deficits for the next 2 years. Bad news as the job slump continues to sweep the nation. Pedro Antunes is a deputy chief economist and economic analyst with the Conference Board of Canada.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start here. Canada is still facing a recession and impending deficits are on the way. Let me ask you this. In no uncertain terms, how would you describe the economic forecast of this country?
Well, I think we have some recessions in some of the oil-producing regions that are affecting Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador particularly. But I think we should set the record that nationally we don't have a recession. We're looking for a little bit of growth. It was certainly very weak last year. And what's going on really is that we've hit some of the areas, in fact, Alberta, which was a primary source of growth over the last number of years. And we do have a diversified economy. When oil prices sink, we do expect Ontario, Quebec, and some of the other provinces to do a little bit better. We are seeing some of that. But not enough, unfortunately. And we're hoping that perhaps in 2017, because right now there's still not all the signs there that we're going to have a strong year in 2016, but we are hoping that in 2017 we start to generate a little stronger performance out of central Canada.
Pedro, Canada saw job losses, incredible numbers in January, which edged up the national employment level and rate to a 2-year high. What trends are you seeing that are contributing to this type of storyline in this country?
Well, I think, again, we need to focus on the regional aspects. So most of the job losses that occurred first in Alberta. And in fact, we're continuing to see much of that weakness occurring in that province. If you look at Ontario, job numbers have been pretty good. I would say nationally, though, you're absolutely right. It's not been a strong job performance for a number of years. The unemployment rate has edged up a little bit. We're sitting in around 7% nationally. There's certainly some slack in the labor market, but I think we do have a country that does see labor mobility, and as we start to see other provinces do a little bit better, outside of the oil patch in particular, we should hopefully see that balancing out a little bit.
Let me ask you this, because this is probably the biggest question on many of our viewers' minds watching. What needs to change economically to turn things around for many in this country?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of fundamental things I think that are concerning to us. I think one of the most important, and I talked about the recovery in especially Ontario and Quebec and some of the manufacturing base of our country. What we need to see happen before we can expand that production and expand our exports is more investment outside of energy. We've seen, of course, energy investment getting very hard hit with oil prices coming down. That's kind of to be expected. But we would have also expected to see more investment outside of the resource sector to prop up the manufacturing base, exports, et cetera. And that hasn't happened yet. We've just gotten data for the fourth quarter of 2015, and investment is still negative, retooling and machinery and equipment. And I think that's a very important driver for future production. Investment today is what drives tomorrow's output and job creation. So we're waiting for that to turn around, and we're a little concerned about the fact that it hasn't already.
Pedro, let me ask you this final question. Someone might be watching this, someone like myself, for example, and say, you know what, a lot of what we're discussing here seems like it's out of reach. It's something that they're waiting to see or hopefully will turn around. What would you suggest to Canadians at a grassroots level, something that they can wake up and start doing tonight or tomorrow that could help to turn the present reality around in their lives?
Well, I think certainly one of the other big issues is our lack of understanding of how diverse an economy we are and how dependent we are from one border to the next across the entire provincial landscape. provincial, territorial, I should say. What we've seen in the last decade is a much more labor mobility across Canada. That's really important. That's worked well. I think one of the things we need to strive towards is a little more acknowledgement that we depend on each other. Interprovincial trade issues are really important, and I think we should be aware of those and aware of when one province is doing well, that does tend to benefit all other regions in the country, and we should be more aware of that.
Pedro Antunes, Deputy Chief Economist and Analyst with the Conference Board of Canada. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Working paycheck to paycheck and still not having enough to make ends meet is a reality many face in Canada. It's a lifestyle being identified as the working poor. Here to discuss this is social policy analyst and fellow with the Metcalfe Foundation. Please welcome John Stapleton to Context. Welcome, John.
Hey, Sheldon. How are you?
Pleasure. Well, John, let's first start. I see you brought some. Let me show this. The working poor. I'm looking at this now, and I'm saying it seems like it could be an oxymoron. Working poor. One doesn't necessarily mean equal the other. What does it really mean to be the working poor? Define that for us.
Well, the way we've defined it at the Metcalfe Foundation is anyone who's making over $3,000 a year. We put that as a floor threshold. And we use that because that's the start of the working income tax benefit, which is a tax benefit paid by the federal government. And then we look at anybody who makes less than half the median income. And the median income in Canada would be, there's everybody who makes more than the halfway point and everybody that makes less than the halfway point, and we look at less than half that. So for a single person, it'd be about $20,000 a year. For a family of four, about $40,000.
So give us a picture of the life experience, what it would be like for someone who falls into this category.
Well, first of all, it's going to be overwhelmingly immigrants in the city of Toronto. It's almost 3 of 4 who are immigrants in the working poor population, overwhelmingly single, also just a little bit younger, but about the same education. But they're people who are going to be working in retail, office cleaners, food servers, that sort of thing.
And in terms of the day-to-day, is it every day they're waking up and essentially starting from ground zero again? What's going through their minds?
Well, they're not going to have that much savings, and they're not going to be homeowners, and that's especially in a city like Toronto or Vancouver. They're going to be people who are really working paycheck to paycheck. They're going to be having trouble making ends meet, and for some people who would be serving food, for example, they'd be visiting a food bank on the way home.
So let me ask you this, what drove you to do all this research here? Of course, a lot of this stuff is available online, but what said, you know what, I need to identify this group and start the research and analysis about it?
Well, the Metcalfe Foundation became curious about it in around 2009, especially, just as you said, it's an oxymoron. You got people working full-time, full year, and they're still below what's considered to be the poverty threshold. In my own case, I was a benefit designer by trade in the Ontario government, and when I left there in 2002, I decided to map out all groups that were poor in Canada. And finally, by 2009 and 10, I got around to the working poor.
Interesting. And looking at our research coming into this, I want to read something to you. Senior economists project Alberta, Newfoundland, and Labrador will remain stuck in a recession this year. Atlantic Canada will see just modest economic growth. BC and Ontario will see moderate expansions. It's very much a jigsaw. It's all over the place type of fiscal outlook.
Right. Yeah.
But when you hear this, looking at it nationally, not just in the Greater Toronto area, what does your heart say? What does your research say in terms of what that will mean for the working poor, nationally speaking?
Well, first of all, there's going to be more of them. Where we tend to see them is in our big cities. So we see them in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. And the reason for that is that we have a lot of highly paid people, and they need a large cadre of people to serve their coffee and to clean their homes and clean their offices and that sort of thing. So we will see more of it in Atlantic Canada, and we'll certainly see more of it in Alberta. But at the same time, it's working poverty is really defined by that large class of people who work in those knowledge industries. That's why we tend to see it in our larger cities.
So let me ask you this, John. Information's great, it empowers us, but we need to be empowered to change. So
Absolutely.
what can we do? What needs to happen, whether it's at a federal level, provincial level, or what needs to occur to turn or to help the future of those who may fall into this category? What do we need to do?
Well, one of the very easy, a living wage. And we see some places in the U.S. that have raised minimum wages to $15 an hour. If everyone was working in the working poor population was working full-time, full year at a $15 minimum wage, there wouldn't be any working poverty.
John Stapleton, social policy analyst and fellow with the Metcalf Foundation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Coming up, finding hope in Christ while in crisis.
Tough economic times have caused Steve Troyer to lay off over 60 people from his business servicing the oil and gas industry. Joining us now via Skype from Fort St. John, Steve Troyer. Steve, is what we are hearing about the job losses is significant? Tell us how it feels.
Well, it certainly is real, but it's hard to contextualize what the job losses really look like. We often hear in the oil and gas industry, people refer to the changes in the rig numbers or drilling rig numbers. So just for context there, every drilling rig produces, there's about 21 direct jobs tied to a drilling rig and about 125 indirect jobs. So we say roughly 145 jobs tied to every drilling rig. So with that number, if you think that in 2014, in Q1 of 2014, we had about 580 drilling rigs working. So that would be roughly 75,000 jobs just relating to the drilling side of the oil and gas industry. And Q1 of 2016, we're running about 100 drilling rigs. So that's about roughly 15,000 jobs. So that, just on the drilling side, that's a loss of about 60,000 jobs. And, you know, we talk about these numbers and drilling rigs and everything, and we forget that those are people. They're real folks. They're moms and dads, and there's children that are connected to that. And there's families that sit around the kitchen table in the evening and say, how do we balance our home budget now that dad's only working half time or mom's been laid off? And so it's just very, very real pain. So that's just one little piece of the context of what we're facing in the oil and gas industry right now.
You don't agree with the Prime Minister. You feel he's actually being a little bit naive about the West.
Well, you know, if you live on the edge of the sea and everybody fishes, it's pretty hard to just diversify from fishing. So, you know, we live in Alberta and Northeast BC. We have oil and gas. That's what we have. We also have agriculture and forestry, and we do a great job of generating a good economic value through those industries. But when it comes to oil and gas, that has been the primary driver of our economy in this region. And will continue to be that in the future. We just need to get through this period of interruption or very disruptive cycle.
So in your view, what is needed now to turn around, you know, the unemployment despair?
Well, I hope he continues to look at the reality of the life that we face and not try to pursue these things from an idealistic perspective or from some great concept of where we'd like to have it. We got to face the reality and make the best of it. So I'm not one that believes strongly in government intervention. I'm not asking for a whole lot from them, but at least acknowledge the pain that Western Canada is facing, and that the solution is not to somehow change and get away from it. We just have to get through this together, and we will. The industry will come back, and there will be lots of jobs created again in the future. It's very interesting to recognize the impact that Western Canada has on the rest of Canada when you start looking at these kind of the impact of this industry. I have friends in the Lower Mainland who were out of work because of the energy industry in BC and Alberta, in northern BC. So a long ways away, people don't think of it being connected, but we're one country, and we certainly rely on each other.
I also know that along with all your business strategy, you do take your faith to the job. So how is Christian faith responding in these kind of tough economic times?
Well, I think what it does is it really redefines who we are. Too often, those of us that attend church or that grew up in a godly home where faith was important, we have a great hold on religion, and probably often we're very shallow in that relationship with Jesus. And what we find is that religion works fine when times are good, but when you get into these kind of cycles and times when there's hurt and pain and loss and difficulty, suddenly religion just doesn't cut it anymore. It doesn't. It's not enough to go and sing a song and sit on a bench and listen to someone say some kind words. That the struggles then that I face are the days when I sit at my office and hold my head and try to figure out, now, how am I going to get payroll made for another 2-week period. And at times like that, I need a friend. I need someone who has some answers. And I'm so grateful that I know Jesus as a friend, that I have a relationship with the person of Jesus, and not just religion. So rather than have a formality, to have a relationship where I can go to him and talk to him and read his word and be encouraged. And it changes what faith really means when we get into these difficult times.
But Steve, does Jesus actually help you make payroll?
Well, that is a great question. He won't. He hasn't put any direct deposits in my account yet. I can assure you of that. One of the interesting things that we find is that the life of a believer, of a follower of Christ, should be one of discipline, and we see that modeled throughout the life of Jesus. And I think that to the extent that we make poor decisions, we are just as susceptible to failure as anybody else. We have no magic bullets. But what we do have is we have the Bible, which gives us some great insights and advice on how to live and manage our businesses. Leaves us far better prepared to face these difficult times. But so much of what happens now is just the emotional strain. It's just the difficulty of facing over and over and over another day, another poor report, another month when there's not enough income or not enough profit. And as we try to balance those things in our mind, things just look so hopeless. They look so difficult. And I can find hope in Jesus. And that's what is the most important, because whether I have a lot or I have a little, if I have Jesus, I know I'll have enough. The 23rd Psalm says, Jesus is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And it's one thing to not want when I have enough. It's another thing to be content and at rest when I feel like I don't have enough. But he talks later on in that passage about the discipline of the shepherd. And so I've learned some lessons through this cycle about the discipline of running a business and being a good employer and how to make these things work. And I've felt Jesus there beside me through the most difficult times. So I think that's what I look to Jesus for, is the relationship, more than just his provision of cash for payroll.
It goes all the way, though. I've heard of homes being lost. It's very severe, isn't it?
Homes are being lost. They're definitely being lost in the communities. We operate in about 6 different communities, and we know of homes that are being turned back. It's a tragic story of loss. These are hopes and dreams that people have. Nobody buys a home expecting to give it back. But people move into a home and live there for 2-3 years and just for one reason or another can't find a way to make payments on it. So certainly we're seeing that develop.
So Steve, what is the answer to these incredible tough times for Western Canada?
Well, I don't know if I have those answers. I think that it's a great time to look around and practice kindness towards our fellow man, whether we have a lot or a little. The smallest kind gesture. You'd be surprised in our communities. It's amazing who struggles with simple things like buying groceries. And so the kindness of just helping out a little bit, a gift card for $25, or taking someone for dinner after church on Sunday, or whatever the case may be. But a little bit of kindness goes a long way when times are difficult.
Steve Troyer, thank you for joining us.
You bet. You're welcome. Thanks.
My question for you at home is this: what has pulled you through a tough economic time? Give us your lessons or your frustrations. We want to hear what you think. You can always reach us here at Context by any of the means you see on the screen, or why don't you give us a call at 1-800-215-4913. Write to us by email at comments@contextwithlorna.com, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Context TV.
So is religion too thin and ineffective to help us through economic tough times? From the Anglican Church of St. Paul's, Bloor Street in Toronto, please welcome Reverend Dr. Barry Parker. Good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Okay, we just heard in the last interview really stark truth out of Alberta and Eastern BC, 60,000 jobs lost, just related to oil rigging, let alone all the other ripples that are going on. And the trucking owner who laid off 60 of those people said, sitting in a pew and hearing kind words is not going to help much. You're a pastor. What's your response?
He's absolutely right. And if that's all that's on offer, I would be surprised if anyone shows up in church this coming Sunday or would call themselves a practicing person of faith. I think faith actually, more so than religion, has a lot to say about economic hardship and how to deal with it and respond to it. But religion per se, that thinks it's only about being nice or kind and can we all get along, I don't think can cut it in the reality of today's world.
Okay, so help me understand the orientation we're going to need with our faith life, with this conviction that God cares for me when these are the kinds of tough economic times.
Well, I think if we can just step back for a moment in the sense of understanding as a Christian pastor, it's predicated on a fundamental belief that I'm called and here to serve the other. And I think that's actually for all who profess to follow Jesus, it's about serving the other. So our orientation is automatically to see where's the need and how do we respond. It shouldn't be something we'll do a good thing here or a good thing there. It really should be a world view.
But what if the need is me? My mortgage is being foreclosed. I've lost my job. My wife has lost her job.
Part of it is for men and women of faith is to be part of a faith community. And I think then within that community, there's an ability to see the needs and share that together. Can things be fixed? I'm always amazed when I look around, especially smaller faith communities in various communities across this land, that I watch in awe, that they are able to deal with harsh, tough realities in a way that no large program or government initiative ever can get to right on the ground. Because these folks are in it together, they believe they're in it together, and they believe that God hasn't checked out, that He's in there with them, fighting every step of the way.
You haven't always been clerical collar.
No.
You have been blue collar. What did you learn about the spiritual issues of your job as a working guy? You paramedic, firefighter, you've
Many years ago.
Yeah.
That the core of all of us is there's a spiritual dimension. That to me is not an issue. The issue is what we believe in and why we believe and what motivates us to serve others. And I think that's a big part of it. I think healthy, vibrant faith communities, for example, are just hardwired to want to bless and serve others in the best sense of the word. That's why I get uncomfortable when I hear is religion too thin. I think, yeah, religion is too thin, but I think a robust faith that has its eyes on the other can really make a transformative difference in our communities.
Okay, so I've been thinking about these words of Jesus. Don't worry about money. Don't worry about tomorrow, one day at a time. Yeah. Is it to be taken literally?
In the sense of need versus want, yes. I think the scriptures are quite clear about that. In fact, the Bible talks both positively and negatively about money and wealth, and also speaks to the human almost instinctive reality to turn our wants into needs very easily, especially in affluent cultures like ours. So I think Jesus, when he speaks that, is saying, be really careful about investing your life in your things, wealth, accumulation, because there will come a time when wealth doesn't matter. So it begs the question, and the New Testament talks a lot about it, how do you live contentedly no matter your life circumstance? That doesn't mean blindly ignoring reality. That doesn't mean feeling the pain of foreclosure or layoffs and all those incredibly tough and harsh things. It simply means, how do you live through that?
Reverend Barry Parker, Senior Pastor of St. Paul's Bloor Street Church in downtown Toronto, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, what the Bible has to say about running out of money. That's next. Well, who can deny that we are in the grip of money? We need it to survive, and into that reality comes a curious task of believing in the God that actually commands people to both work for their food and to stop all work one day a week. The commanded Sabbath rest of the Old Testament was a built-in trust mechanism, a one day at a time rule on provision. So I think we better go to the bank with this biblical promise from God. Your Heavenly Father already knows all your needs and will give you all you need from day to day if you live for Him and make the kingdom of God your primary concern. So don't worry about tomorrow. Those are the words of Jesus in Matthew 6:33. And when I listen to 60,000 jobs related to oil drilling that were lost in Alberta and eastern BC in the past 4 months, well, a little bit of practical kindness for the unemployed with those words from Jesus is going to be needed. For all of us at Context, I'm Lorna Duick. Thank you for watching. Join us again next week as we look at life beyond the headlines. Thanks, everybody.
We have more news for you online at Context. Now, these are the stories you won't see on TV, but it's a daily delivery for your phone, iPad, or computer. Here's a few of them. How do you want the Canadian law on doctor-assisted death to be written? Lorna says the time to speak is now. She shares her thoughts on the blog. Well, my good friend from the West, Molly Thomas, caught up with Saskatchewan Rough Rider Jeff Knox Jr. to talk football and forgiveness. Take a look.
There's no way, man, in life that you can go without and being angry at your parents. I said I did that with my father, then I lost him a week after, finally getting to know him, so that hurt. So with me forgiving my mom was just forgiving her, man. Like, I can't really explain why.
Well, the big question, how can we know that God exists? Lorna sits down for a heated debate with one Christian, Annie Bannister, and one skeptic, Christopher DiCarlo. Find all that and more online at contextwithlorna.com.